The waterline had always been calm. A long, quiet stretch held back by a low earthen dam my grandfather built decades ago, before HOAs, before bylaws, before anyone thought community fees applied to land that had existed longer than their paperwork. The pond fed livestock, softened floods, and kept the lower ground dry. It wasn't decorative. It was functional. And it was mine. That's why the notice confused me. Final warning: unpaid HOA assessments. I read it twice, standing at the edge of the dam where cattails bent in the breeze. The letter claimed I owed back fees for shared water infrastructure. It cited rules I'd never agreed to for an association I'd never joined. My property predated the development by years. The survey lines were clear. The dam sat fully on my land. I emailed back, attached the deed, and thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. A week later, I found fresh tire tracks near the spillway. Then orange flags. Then a crew truck idling where no one had permission to be. I walked down and asked who authorized the work. HOA, the foreman said, without looking up. We're relieving pressure. Relieving pressure, it turned out, meant cutting a channel through the dam. I told them to stop. They didn't. They waved a paper at me, an HOA directive referencing noncompliance and abatement. No county permit. No engineer's stamp. No emergency order. Just assumption wrapped in confidence. I called the sheriff's non-emergency line. By the time a deputy arrived, the channel was already cut. Water began to move, slowly at first, then with purpose, finding the new, lower path the machines had carved. The deputy looked at the paperwork, looked at the water, and shook his head. "This is civil," he said. "You'll need a lawyer." The crew packed up and left. The dam was no longer a dam. At first, it didn't look dramatic. A gentle spill. A widening trickle. The kind of thing you might think would settle on its own. But water doesn't forget gravity. It remembers every inch it's given. By nightfall, the pond had dropped several feet. By morning, the channel had widened, its edges sloughing off as the flow increased. I stood there with boots in the mud, watching years of careful balance undo itself because someone decided a fee notice carried more weight than physics. Downstream, the development slept. Rows of new homes sat on what used to be a floodplain, reassured by brochures and retention ponds that only worked because my dam existed. The HOA's glossy maps showed blue lines and green buffers. None of them mentioned the private structure upstream holding back thousands of cubic yards of water. I called my attorney. He asked one question. Did they have a permit?
No.
Did they notify the county engineer?
No.
He exhaled. Document everything.
I did.
Photos of the cut. Video of the flow increasing hour by hour. The HOA notice claiming authority they didn't have. By afternoon, rain moved in. Not a storm, just steady, patient rain. Enough to matter. The water level rose faster than it could drain. The new channel deepened. The edges collapsed. What had been a controlled release became a breach.
I called the county this time.
They came fast. Too fast. Sirens down the road below. Trucks. Flashing lights. People pointing uphill. By the time the county engineer reached me, the pond was dropping rapidly, and the creek below was no longer a creek. It was a flood. And the HOA, finally realizing what they'd done, began making calls they should have made before they ever put a machine blade into a dam they didn't own. The county engineer didn't waste time. He stood at the breach, boots sinking into wet soil, eyes tracking the flow like a doctor reading a pulse that was already racing. He didn't ask who authorized the cut. He didn't need to. This dam was holding back your upstream volume, he said flatly. And it was doing it without failure. Below us, the water had found speed. What used to trickle through a narrow creek now ran bank to bank, brown and fast, carrying branches, silt, and pieces of the dam itself. The rain kept coming, steady, indifferent, and every drop added momentum. Down in the neighborhood, things started happening all at once. Storm drains backed up first. Then retention ponds filled past their marked limits. Yards closest to the creek disappeared under water that had nowhere else to go. Some pumps screamed until they burned out. Basements filled from the floor up, not the walls. Proof the water table itself was rising. The HOA president called me. Not angry. Not confident.
Panicked.
She said the situation was unexpected. She asked if I could do something to stop the flow. She asked if I had any control left. I looked at the widening breach.
No, I said.
That control left when your crew cut the dam. She tried to argue. Then she stopped. Sirens echoed from below. Fire crews started knocking on doors. Residents waded through knee-deep water carrying pets and boxes. Cars stalled in intersections that had never flooded before. The county declared a localized emergency. That changed everything. Now it wasn't a dispute about fees or authority. It was about unauthorized alteration of a water control structure, about downstream impact, about liability measured not in invoices, but in homes. The county engineer ordered immediate mitigation. Sandbags went up where they could. Temporary berms were thrown together downstream to slow the surge. But you can't uncut a dam in the rain. By evening, the flood reached the lowest row of houses. Garages went first, then living rooms, then electrical panels. Power cut out in blocks. The HOA board scrambled, issuing alerts that came hours too late. Their phones rang nonstop. Insurance hotlines lit up. The words "act of God" started getting tossed around as if weather, not a bulldozer, had caused this. I stayed where I was documenting. Because upstream, the evidence was undeniable. The cut, the machine's tracks, the flags, the absence of permits posted where they should have been. The county engineer asked me to walk him through the timeline. I showed him the notice, the email with the deed attached, the video of the crew cutting anyway. He closed his notebook slowly. "This isn't unpaid fees," he said. "This is unauthorized destruction of critical infrastructure." Below us, a development built on borrowed safety was learning exactly how temporary that safety had always been. And the HOA, having pulled the one lever that truly mattered, discovered too late that water doesn't negotiate, and liability flows downhill faster than any flood. By morning, the rain had moved on. The water hadn't. What remained was a wide, brown scar through the neighborhood, mud on driveways, debris tangled in fences, and a silence that only comes after alarms stop sounding. People stood in soaked shoes staring at their homes, doing the quiet math of what could be saved and what was already gone. County inspectors moved door to door. Clipboards replaced sirens. Cameras replaced urgency. Every flooded structure was photographed, tagged, and logged. The question everyone asked, out loud or not, was the same. How did this happen? The answer sat uphill, carved cleanly through an earthen dam with no permit number anywhere near it. The HOA's attorney arrived mid-morning. He didn't come to see me first. He went straight to the county engineer, then to emergency management, then to the inspectors. By the time he finally walked up the slope toward the breach, his confidence had already thinned. He asked if we could talk privately.
We did.
He tried to frame it as a misunderstanding. Claimed the HOA believed the dam was shared infrastructure. Suggested the work was preventative, necessary, urgent. I handed him copies.
The deed.
The survey. The email where I told them, clearly, to stop. He read without comment. Then he asked the question that told me everything. "Do you have insurance on the dam?" "Yes," I said. "And it specifically excludes third-party interference." His face tightened. Because insurance doesn't like surprises, but it hates unauthorized actions even more. The county issued a preliminary finding that afternoon. The breach was declared man-made, not weather-related. The work was flagged as unpermitted alteration of a water control structure, triggering mandatory reporting to the state. That took the HOA's fee dispute off the table entirely. Now it was regulatory. Now it was criminal adjacent. The HOA president resigned before sunset. Not announced. Not explained. Just gone. The board issued a statement blaming a contractor error. The contractor responded within an hour, releasing the directive they'd been given, with the HOA's letterhead at the top and signatures at the bottom. That ended the contractor conversation. By evening, State officials were on site. They measured. They sampled. They photographed the breach from every angle. They asked me questions, then asked me again, with a recorder running. Downstream, residents met with adjusters who couldn't yet promise anything. The words flood exclusion came up more than once. Voices rose. Someone cried. Upstream, I stood next to a structure that no longer existed in the way it had that morning. The state engineer looked at the damage and said quietly, "This dam was doing its job." Then he looked at the cut, and someone decided they knew better. The reckoning didn't come with shouting or handcuffs that day. It came with findings, filings, and the kind of documentation that doesn't fade when the water does. The HOA had destroyed something they didn't own to enforce a rule they couldn't apply. And now, everything downstream, every basement, every yard, every ruined appliance, was being traced back to one decision made without authority, expertise, or permission. Water had done what water always does. But responsibility was finally flowing uphill. The lawsuits didn't arrive all at once. They came in waves, methodical, coordinated, and relentless. Homeowners sued the HOA. Insurers sued the HOA. The county issued citations. The state opened a formal investigation. Every path led back to the same place: the breach. Engineers reconstructed the timeline using rainfall data, soil composition, and flow modeling. Their conclusion was blunt. Even with the rain, the neighborhood would not have flooded if the dam hadn't been cut. The dam had provided controlled retention. The HOA's action had removed it without replacement. The phrase proximate cause appeared everywhere. The HOA tried to argue force majeure, weather, unforeseeable conditions. But the reports didn't budge. Rain was expected. Floodplain behavior was known. The only unexpected variable was a bulldozer where no bulldozer belonged. The contractors settled early. They handed over emails, directives, and invoices. Every document pointed back to the HOA board's decision to resolve unpaid fees by abating what they claimed was a shared structure. No permits requested. No engineers consulted. No county notifications filed. The board members began resigning one by one. Not dramatically. Quietly. Lawyers advised silence. The HOA's insurance carrier denied coverage within 30 days. Unauthorized work. Gross negligence. Exclusions triggered. That denial changed everything. Without insurance, the HOA was exposed, not just for repairs, but for the downstream damage: mold remediation, structural repairs, displaced families, ruined vehicles, lost personal property. Numbers climbed fast. 7 figures didn't cover it. 8 figures started appearing in spreadsheets. The county ordered the dam rebuilt to modern standards at the HOA's expense, under state supervision. Environmental remediation was added. Stream restoration. Erosion control. Long-term monitoring. I didn't pay a cent. My attorney ensured my role was documented clearly. Owner, objector, reporter. The paper trail mattered. It separated responsibility from proximity. At a town hall meeting, called hastily and poorly attended, the interim HOA board tried to explain what had happened. Residents demanded answers. Someone asked why fees had been enforced with heavy equipment instead of a court filing. No one had a good answer. Because there wasn't one. The development had been built with an unspoken assumption that upstream safety would remain someone else's responsibility. That the dam would always be there. That authority could be asserted without consequence. Those assumptions were now underwater. As the months passed, the neighborhood changed. For sale, signs multiplied. Values dipped. Trust evaporated. The HOA's power shrank to newsletters and reminders no one read. The dam rebuild began under watchful eyes. Engineers, inspectors, and permits posted clearly at the site. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Where confidence had once driven decisions, caution now ruled. Because the cost of being wrong had finally been measured. And it was higher than any unpaid fee they'd ever tried to collect. The new dam took a year to finish. Engineered, permitted, inspected, at every phase. It was taller, stronger, and designed to handle storms far worse than the one that exposed the HOA's mistake. State signage marked it clearly now: ownership, responsibility, emergency contacts. Nothing left to assumption. That was the difference. Downstream, repairs dragged on much longer. Some families returned to their homes after months. Others never did. Mold remediation turned into structural replacement. Insurance fights turned into court dates. What the water hadn't destroyed outright, time and paperwork finished off. The HOA dissolved quietly. Not with a vote. There wasn't enough money left to maintain operations. Assets were liquidated. Accounts frozen. The final notices were legal, not communal. A judge appointed a receiver to wind things down and distribute what little remained. It wasn't enough to make everyone whole. It never is. The development still exists, but it's different now. Fewer shared rules. More individual responsibility. People check maps before they build. They ask questions before they assume. Upstream and downstream aren't abstract concepts anymore. They're lived experience. I still walk the edge of the pond some mornings. The waterline is steady again. The cattails have returned. The balance is restored, this time with steel reinforcements and stamped approvals instead of hand-packed earth and family knowledge. I keep the original HOA notice in a folder. Not out of spite. As a reminder. Because everything that followed, the flood, the lawsuits, the loss, can be traced back to one decision: enforcing authority where none existed, using force where process was required. Water didn't punish them. Gravity didn't take sides. The law simply caught up. Quiet justice doesn't arrive with thunder. It arrives with records, reports, and accountability that can't be diverted once the flow starts. The HOA thought they were collecting fees. What they actually did was breach something far more important. And once that line broke, there was no holding back the consequences.